Rain slashed down in angry sheets over the polished streets of Lekki Phase 1, turning the sleek city into a blur of headlights and glistening reflections. A black SUV purred to a stop outside one of Lagos' most exclusive restaurants, its tinted windows hiding its occupant from the curious gazes of the valet boys scrambling with umbrellas. The door swung open, and Brian Adewell stepped out. Immaculately dressed in a dark tailored suit, his presence sharp and composed, he nodded once, dismissing the valet, and walked briskly through the entrance, water beading off his shoulders. Inside, the lighting was soft and golden, the scent of imported wines and plated appetizers thick in the air. Brian made his way to a table marked reserved Mr. Adewell, pulled out his phone, and casually began to scroll, checking emails and headlines, the hum of conversations around him fading into background noise. But then his hand paused, phone forgotten, screen dimming in his palm. Across the room, framed by the arching entryway of the restaurant, a woman entered, and the entire room seemed to rearrange itself around her. She moved with quiet elegance, dressed in a wine-colored gown that whispered confidence and grace. Her hair was swept back, revealing the curve of her neck and the understated shimmer of gold earrings. She smiled as she walked in, completely unaware of the eyes that followed her, unaware of the one pair that burned with recognition and disbelief. Brian's heart dropped. It was her, Elora James, the girl he had once loved, the girl he had left. Her laugh was still the same, soft, sincere, slightly tilted upward, like it didn't belong in a world so sharp. She didn't see him. She was too focused on the group she had entered with, 5 sharp-looking men and women in business, where one of whom reached out to pull out a chair for her, with a familiarity that made Brian's chest tighten. His boss. Elora smiled at him, effortlessly comfortable, before taking her seat at the head of the table. Brian's jaw tensed. It had been 7 years. 7 years since he last saw her standing outside his cramped apartment, eyes wet but determined, clutching the envelope that held his rejection. 7 years since he uttered the words that had haunted her and shamed him. I can't marry someone with nothing. I have a future to protect. He'd convinced himself it was necessary, that ambition didn't wait for love, that success required sacrifices, that she would be fine, eventually, that she would disappear. But she hadn't disappeared. She had transformed. And now, here she was, not just surviving, but shining, not clinging to his memory, but seated beside the man who signed his paychecks. Brian looked away, forcing his breathing to steady, his composure to return, but the truth was undeniable. Elora hadn't faded. She'd risen, and now she was sitting across the room, radiant, untouchable, while he, the man who left her behind, could only watch. At 27, Brian Adewell had been on a meteoric rise. Smart, driven, and fiercely determined, he had clawed his way out of poverty with nothing but grit and a deep-seated fear of ever returning to the life his late father left behind. Raised by a single mother who worked long shifts to keep food on the table, and with a younger sister who looked up to him like he was the sun itself, Brian learned early that survival depended on ambition. He wasn't just working to make money. He was working to erase struggle from his bloodline. Back then, during the quieter, more grounded days of his life, Brian had Elora James beside him, a warm, thoughtful schoolteacher from a modest background. Their relationship had been steady, filled with late-night walks, shared meals made of laughter and small dreams, and the kind of simple happiness money couldn't buy. Elora, with her gentle eyes and unwavering encouragement, had been the calm. In Brian's storm, they had built dreams together, dreams of a modest home, shared responsibilities, and a life where love was the currency that mattered. But everything changed when Brian got promoted. Suddenly, his world tilted. New circles formed around him, powerful men in expensive suits, women with designer accents, parties in Banana Island mansions. His salary doubled, then tripled. He was no longer the struggling boy from Ajagunal, and with the money came something else. Voices. Subtle, persuasive, insidious voices from his colleagues, mentors, and even his mother. You need a woman who fits your future, not one dragging you backward. Slowly, Brian began to pull away from Elora. He started noticing things he never cared about before: the simplicity of her clothes, the old phone she carried, the way she spoke with unpolished honesty. When she lovingly hinted at marriage one night, his response was like a dagger. "You're not enough." He told her he had a future to protect, that he needed someone who could elevate his image. Then he walked away, fully expecting her to cry, to beg, to plead for him to stay. But Elora, true to her quiet strength, didn't chase him. She let him go, and for 7 years, they never spoke again. Now, at 34, Brian was a regional bank manager, commanding respect, earning big, and dating beautiful women with impressive resumes and even more impressive family names. But nothing ever lasted. Every relationship was a deal, transactional, polished on the surface, hollow underneath. He owned a luxurious apartment in Victoria Island, drove a gleaming imported car, and took holidays in Cape Town and Paris. But every night he came home, there was a weight on his chest he couldn't name. His mother still pressed him to settle down, showed him pictures of eligible daughters from prominent families. But no matter how often he denied it, no one ever truly compared to Elora. Her absence had become a quiet ache, one he never spoke of, not even to himself. What he didn't know was that Elora, after that devastating breakup, left Lagos with a bruised heart and an iron resolve. She worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, tutoring, writing, volunteering. Her kindness never left her, but her softness sharpened. A scholarship eventually came through, and she moved to Abuja to pursue a master's in education and technology. From there, she built something extraordinary. She founded Girls Can Code, a non-profit organization focused on giving underprivileged girls in Nigeria access to STEM education. She fought for funding, won international grants, partnered with tech giants, and turned her heartbreak into fuel. Now, years later, Elora James was no longer the quiet schoolteacher someone once dismissed. She was a formidable woman with power, purpose, and poise, and she had returned to Lagos, not for nostalgia, but for business. Girls Can Code was expanding, and she was finalizing a major partnership deal with a financial institution eager to support her initiatives. That institution, the one managed by Brian Adewale, they were about to become colleagues, and neither of them was ready for what that truly meant. Brian's firm had recently committed to rebranding its corporate image, and part of that effort included sponsoring a major social impact initiative. After weeks of internal reviews, proposals, and vetting, one NGO was unanimously chosen for the partnership: Girls Can Code. Brian had been distracted that week, focused on managing high-value portfolios and preparing for quarterly evaluations, so he hadn't paid close attention to the list of finalists. It wasn't until the official partnership presentation that the name hit him like a freight train. The room was packed, executives in sharp suits, PR personnel ready with cameras, and journalists scribbling notes. Then the door opened, and in walked the lead representative of the NGO, Elora James. Her presence was effortless, commanding without being loud. She wore a tailored navy jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a low bun, and her posture straight, with quiet confidence. Brian stared, momentarily forgetting his role as the regional manager. The room faded. All he could see was her, the woman he'd left behind with cruel words and a colder heart. As she began her pitch, Brian struggled to maintain composure. Her voice was steady, articulate, rich with purpose. She spoke of inclusion, of empowering girls from underserved communities, of coding boot camps in villages, and partnerships with local tech hubs. She presented not just with facts, but with fire, the kind that ignites change. Her slides were clean, her messaging powerful. Every word she spoke reminded Brian of who she always was, passionate, sincere, and driven. He felt his palms go clammy. When their eyes finally met mid-presentation, time seemed to stutter. It was brief, a second, maybe less, but something ancient passed between them. Recognition, memory, loss. Later that afternoon, as the crowd dispersed and executives congratulated each other, Brian caught sight of her near the corridor leading to the boardroom. Without thinking, he walked toward her. "Elora," he said, his voice low, careful. She turned, that same composed expression on her face, eyes unreadable. "It's been years," he added. Her lips curved into a polite, practiced smile. "Yes, 7. Her tone was cool, almost clinical. He searched her eyes for a crack, a flicker of warmth. "I was hoping we could talk." "Maybe," she cut him off gently, but firmly. "Let's keep this professional, Mr. Adewale. I'm here for the initiative, not for old ghosts." She nodded slightly, then walked past him. Brian stood frozen, stunned. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't in control of the conversation. The power dynamic had flipped. She wasn't the heartbroken girl anymore. She was a woman with presence, clarity, and boundaries. Over the next few weeks, they worked closely together on the campaign rollout, press interviews, internal reports, project proposals, and community outreach strategies. Each meeting felt like a storm under Brian's calm exterior. The more time he spent with Elora, the more he remembered the softness of her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about purpose, the integrity she wore like a second skin. But there was a distance in her now, not coldness exactly, but a professionalism that didn't allow room for sentiment. She smiled when needed, nodded when appropriate, and addressed him as Mr. Adewale in group settings. And that, more than anything, rattled him. Because now Brian saw her not just through the lens of regret, but through the clarity of truth. She had become everything he once deemed, not enough, and far more. The very thing he chased in others, elegance, ambition, sophistication, had always been in her. Only now she belonged to herself, and he wasn't sure if there was a path back. The weeks that followed the campaign kickoff left Brian in emotional turbulence he hadn't felt in years. Unable to shake the sense of something lost, something real, he began reaching out to old friends from his university days, people who knew both him and Elora during those formative years. One mutual friend, I.O., offered a sobering truth over lunch. "You know," he said, sipping his drink, "you were her first heartbreak. When you left her like that, Elora just ... disappeared. She left Lagos, deleted social media, didn't even say goodbye. We all assumed she was nursing something heavy." Brian listened in silence, the weight of his past choices pressing down like concrete. He remembered how easily he'd dismissed her, how he'd let ego and status blind him to what they had. It wasn't just that he left, it was how he made her feel like she wasn't worthy of staying for. Back home, things weren't much better. His relationship with Tiana, a successful lifestyle influencer who fit perfectly into his curated world, began to crack. Tiana, sharp and perceptive, wasn't blind to the changes in him. One evening, over dinner, she leaned across the table and said, "You're not present, Brian. You're distracted. Is there someone else?" Her tone wasn't angry, just deeply tired. Brian couldn't meet her eyes. "No," he muttered, then paused, correcting himself. "There was someone from my past." That night, they broke up. It was quiet, mutual, but heavy. Tiana left without a scene, only offering a parting line that stung more than anger could have. "I hope she's worth all the silence." Meanwhile, in the offices of the firm, another story was unfolding. Elora, as always, handled her business with grace and clarity. But it didn't go unnoticed that David Onwaha, the regional director, Brian's superior, had taken an interest in her. David was polished, brilliant, and genuinely warm. He asked smart questions during presentations, offered her resources for her initiative, and even joined her on a community outreach visit. He treated her like a partner, an equal, something Brian never truly had. Brian noticed the rapport instantly, and it dug into him like glass. Every smile Elora gave David felt like another reminder of what he had thrown away. The tipping point came during a strategy review meeting. Elora and David sat beside each other, laughing softly over a shared inside joke. Brian's chest tightened. That evening, he finally texted her, asking if they could talk. Not as colleagues, just two people who once meant something to each other. To his surprise, Elora agreed to meet. They sat at a quiet rooftop lounge overlooking the Lagos skyline. The wind was cool, the city glowing below. Brian spoke first, his voice more vulnerable than it had been in years. "You've changed," he said, studying her face. "You've grown into someone remarkable." Elora's gaze was steady. "I didn't change, Brian. You just refused to see me then." Her words cut, not cruelly, but with honesty. He lowered his head, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I was a fool, blinded by ambition, by fear. I thought having more meant needing someone different, someone who fit the image. But the truth is, none of them were ever you." She didn't respond right away, just looked out at the skyline, calm and unreadable. Over the following days, Brian began sending her messages, long, thoughtful ones. He apologized without excuses. He reminisced about shared moments, their first date in Yaba, her reading poetry to him under the mango tree, the time they planned to open a small school together. He poured everything into the words. One night, after a glass too many of wine and too much silence in his apartment, he sent the message that felt like truth peeling through his chest. "I think I still love you." He waited for a reply. An hour passed, then a day, then two. Nothing. It wasn't anger that met him, it was silence. And that silence echoed louder than any rejection. The gala sparkled with opulence, held at one of Victoria Island's most prestigious hotels. Celebrities, CEOs, and diplomats filled the grand hall, dressed in shimmering gowns and tailored suits, glasses of champagne in hand. Tonight was about celebrating innovation, impact, and the people shaping Nigeria's future. And among the honorees, Elora James stood tall. She wore a crimson dress that commanded attention, but it was her poise, her quiet, unshakable presence that captivated the room. Brian sat near the back, his heart pounding with every word of her introduction. They spoke of her non-profits, success, of how she'd empowered over 2,000 girls across the country to pursue science and technology, of her journey from an overlooked teacher to a national voice for change. And then Elora walked onto the stage, and the applause thundered. She stepped up to the mic, glanced briefly across the sea of faces, and began. "7 years ago," she said, her voice steady but weighted, "I was told I wasn't enough, that I had nothing, that my dreams were too small and my world too limited." The room quieted, but I learned that the loudest voices of doubt often come from people who can't see past their own fear. I was lucky. I had mentors. I had girls around me who dared to dream with me. Today, I stand with them. Girls who were told the same thing. Girls who are now coding, engineering, designing, building. We're rewriting that story together. The audience rose to its feet, clapping, some dabbing tears from their eyes. Brian didn't stand. He couldn't move. His chest felt caved in. The weight of her words, and his role in them, landed hard. He watched her descend from the stage, smiling graciously at the admirers who surrounded her. But after the ceremony, when most people had turned to celebrate and clink glasses, he made his way quietly to the hallway behind the event space, where she stood alone by a window, catching a breath. "Elora," he said softly. She turned, recognizing his voice instantly. The smile faded. There was no anger in her face, only guarded calm. Brian's voice cracked as he stepped closer. "You were always meant for this. I see that now." She said nothing, just waited. "I've built wealth," he continued, "but somewhere along the way, I lost my soul. I became the kind of man I promised myself I'd never be. Cold, proud, empty. You were the best part of my life, and I destroyed it." The rawness of his confession hung between them like a fog. Elora's lips parted slightly, her composure wobbled. Her eyes glistened, not with softness, but something deeper, pain that had long been buried, now surfacing. "I begged you to believe in me," she whispered. "You looked me in the eye and said I wasn't enough. Do you know what that does to someone?" He nodded, tears spilling freely. "I was afraid of being poor again, of losing the chance to rise. I thought I needed someone who looked the part. I was wrong, God. I was so wrong." He reached out, slightly, not touching her, but a question trembling in his voice. "Do I still have a chance?" There was a long pause. She looked at him, really looked at him, the man she once loved, the boy who shattered her, and didn't look back. And then she exhaled slowly. "You had your chance," she said quietly, "and I've forgiven you, but I've outgrown you." Then, with the grace she had always carried, she turned and walked away, her silhouette receding into the golden lights of the ballroom, leaving Brian standing in the hallway, alone with the truth he could no longer outrun. After the gala, something shifted in Brian, not just in his heart, but in the way he moved through the world. The weight of Elora's words, and the quiet finality of her goodbye, lingered like a mirror he could no longer avoid. For weeks, he sat with the discomfort, with the version of himself he had become, the man who once measured people by what they had, who traded connection for clout, who walked away from love because it didn't come wrapped in prestige. But instead of spiraling into guilt or denial, Brian chose to confront it. He reached out to Elora's NGO, not with a grand gesture or apology, but a humble request. "I'd like to help." At first, he was given small tasks, carrying supplies, organizing files, helping girls prepare for mock interviews. No one cared about his tailored suits or his bank title. They cared about his consistency, his willingness to show up. Slowly, the staff warmed to him, and the girls began to see him as someone safe, a man who listened, who didn't talk down, who was there not to impress, but to serve. On weekends, Brian started visiting local secondary schools on the mainland, identifying students who were gifted but lacked support. He began paying their school fees anonymously. When a girl at one outreach center cried because she couldn't afford her final exams, Brian covered the cost quietly and made sure she had food for the month. His friends noticed the change. So did his mother. One evening, he sat with her on the balcony, watching the traffic hum beneath the Lagos skyline. "You raised me to chase success," he told her softly, "but you never taught me to value people. I had to lose everything that mattered to understand that." His mother teared up, reaching for his hand, whispering, "I didn't know better then, but I'm proud of the man you're becoming now." Meanwhile, Elora's star continued to rise. She was featured in Forbes Africa under Leaders to Watch, interviewed by CNN Africa, and invited to speak at the African Women in Tech Summit. Her foundation expanded into Ghana and Senegal, training hundreds of girls and equipping schools with solar-powered labs. She became a household name, not for fame, but for impact. And yet, in the whirlwind of her rising platform, she never forgot the fuel behind her fire, the girl who was once told she wasn't enough. One afternoon, while sorting through sponsor letters, she paused and penned a short note. No flourish, no lingering sentiment, just clarity and grace. You weren't my happy ending, but you were my beginning. She sealed it and had it dropped at Brian's office, unsigned but unmistakably from her. When he read it, Brian smiled, not with longing or regret, but with peace. Some love stories aren't meant to return, but sometimes the ending is the lesson, and from it, both people grow. Brian stood quietly outside the faded yellow school building in Ikorodu, the red dust swirling around his polished shoes. Children laughed in the background, clutching envelopes marked with a bold purple stamp. The Elora Fund, a scholarship initiative he had created in her name, not for recognition, but as tribute. He had spent months shaping it, making sure it reached the right children, the ones with fire in their eyes and no resources in their hands. Today he watched them come forward, one by one, eyes bright, uniforms worn, but proud, and hand in their thank you notes, some scribbled in pencil, others colored with crayons. A little girl with pigtails approached him slowly, her smile shy. She held out a folded piece of paper, creased at the corners. "Uncle, this is for you," she said. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of her standing beside a tall man, both holding books under a sun that beamed with hopeful rays. "Thank you for believing in me," it read in shaky cursive. Brian knelt to accept it, his heart tight. He looked round, no cameras, no applause, just the orange wash of sunset painting the sky, and the laughter of children echoing in the air. He took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the horizon, and felt the stillness settle in. This wasn't redemption. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it, the girl he broke, the version of himself he left behind, and the choice she made that saved them both. He clutched the card, stood upright, and whispered under his breath, voice catching slightly, "Thank you for walking away." The wind shifted gently, warm and knowing, as if carrying his words to where they were meant to land. Then he turned back toward the children, ready to give again, fade out.